This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode I chat with masters of horror about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Now, today's guest is Matthew Holness. He is a comedian, writer, director, and actor. And he is probably best known for Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. He also wrote and directed a fantastic film, Possum, and has done a number of other great things, including A Gun for George and Bruiser. But today, for this very special Halloween episode, we are here primarily to celebrate the forthcoming release of Garth Marenghi's Teratome, the brand new Garth Marenghi book. And I absolutely love Garth Marenghi and Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. I have oft quoted it with my friends, and so it was a tremendous pleasure and an honor to be able to sit down and chat to Matthew Holness. And even though we only had about an hour, we really did get into so much stuff. So of course there's a lot of Garth Marenghi chat, there's a little bit of Possum conversation, but we also delved into a little bit on the editing process, on what it was like growing up in Whitstable, and a lot more. But before any of that, a little bit of an advert break.
Cosmovorous, the debut cosmic horror novel from R.C. Housen. Esmeralda has lived on the fringes of society for as long as she can remember, until a Halloween night gone wrong unlocks a cache of nightmarish memories. Visions of a bizarre desert town, images of a mysterious woman, the pain of an ultimate betrayal, and the shame of a bargain made in blood. Now she must travel back and learn the true nature of the ravenous cosmos. Cosmovorous, available everywhere books are sold.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabinio Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
Hey everyone, this is author Jeff Strand, and I cannot wait to see you at Horror on Main. Remember, attendance is mandatory. Don't make me hunt you down.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. We explore all the shadows within horror entertainment. From idea to product, there are many people behind the scenes, and we're bringing them to you, as well as contests, movies, panels, podcasters, and much more. We've been going to conventions for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. See HorrorOnMain.com for details.
Okay, well, with that said, here it is. It is Matthew Holness on This is Horror. Matthew, welcome to This is Horror.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
Happy to have you here. And to begin with, I want to know what early life lessons you learnt growing up in Whitstable.
What early life lessons? Oh my goodness. I don't know really. I wanted to get away from Whitstable. I remember that. It was so sort of quiet and sort of dead end. It's not that anymore. It's absolutely thriving. It's like a London suburb. But when I was growing up there as a boy, it was very sort of quiet. And I mean, it was nice. It had a kind of Stephen King town feel to it, but I guess everyone feels that in a dead end town. They all feel, you know, if you're into horror, you feel like there's just lots of interesting things, you know, that your imagination dreams up down every street and every field and every area of woodland. So I loved it. I loved growing up, and I love going back there. But it is very busy there now. It's not the place it was in lots of ways.
Yeah.
No life lessons.
No life lessons were imparted in Whitstable.
Mistakes I've made in life. There was no forewarning. There was no, alert at all. No, I just went out and made lots of mistakes, and there you go, like anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, that is often the way that it goes. But
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose particularly for horror fans, if they hear Whitstable, then it's difficult to not think of Peter Cushing. And
Absolutely.
it's my understanding that you actually met him at an early age.
I did, on a couple of occasions. I mean, I would say that probably most people in Whitstable living then at that time in Whitstable would have seen him on a fairly regular basis, because you'd always see him cycling around the town, around Tankerton Slopes. He was a very, popular figure, and was always about. But yes, I did meet him. My mum and was taking me and my brother, who were quite young. I actually think, when I remembered this before, and I've spoken about it before, I think I was remembering it, I was a lot younger than I was. It was 1985, I think. That's what I've got on my autograph. So I would have been 10, actually. And my brother would have been younger. But yes, he was looking in the bookshop window of Pirrie and Cavender's, which was the a really lovely bookshop that we had in Whitstable, where I basically bought all the books that I read growing up. And he was looking in there. My brother and I were huge fans of him, because we used to watch, we used to record the Hammer omnibus film screenings on Fridays, and we would, watch them the following morning. So we were huge Peter Cushing fans, and obviously Star Wars too. And my mum went up and kindly introduced us and asked if he would mind sort of just chatting to two young boys that were huge fans. And he was a little concerned that we were watching his Hammer films, but he was absolutely lovely, and he signed us both an autograph then. And then when at that time we had we had the 11 plus system. I think they still do it in Kent, actually. And I passed my 11 plus, and as a little reward, my parents asked me, was there something I would like? And I really wanted Peter Cushing's autobiography, which was coming out then. So we queued up in Canterbury, the W.H. Smith's in Canterbury, where he was doing a signing, and he very kindly signed his autobiography to me. But he didn't just sort of write one, sign his name. He took the time to have a chat and write a lengthy message in there. So really, really lovely man, and yes, a huge, wonderful memory of childhood. How fantastically lucky I was to grow up in a town with such a great, iconic actor. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. No, that's remarkable. And I don't know if you've read the Stephen Volk trilogy on Peter.
I've not. Yes, I'm so sorry. I know the one you're talking about. I haven't. I've read that one. I haven't read the other two at the moment, although I do have them. But I have read the Peter Cushing one, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, of those Hammer horror movies, what was the first one that legitimately terrified you?
I think probably the Terence Fisher Dracula, the original Dracula. That's I think the first one I was due to see, I think, was Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. I think that, but I wasn't. I think we the tape didn't work, I think, and I actually missed it. Or I think it was that, or my mum was in two minds as to whether or not I could actually watch a horror film at that age. So I think she put it off and wouldn't let me record it. But I think I kicked up such a fuss that by the following week she let me record and watch it the next day. So I remember being really frightened by that one, and the one that absolutely haunted me, and I think because I don't know, there was just too much happening, was Dracula AD 1972, which there was just so much blood in that film, and as a kid I just couldn't quite cope. I mean, I loved it, absolutely loved it, but that one really got into my head, I think. And of course, because there's lots of sex and all these things that to a young child you're going, what is this horrific adult world? So that's probably a film I should not have watched, but it was one that really did have an effect on me, because it was just everything I didn't know about life in a film.
Yeah. And I mean, what kind of books were you reading at that time?
I was actually reading mostly fighting fantasy game books, the Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone books, and those were really my entry into book reading. I absolutely adored them and collected them right up until I think number 50, and then I realised I had to sort of stop. But I wish I hadn't. Now I'm collecting them again, and wish I'd carried on. But yeah, those were mainly the books. I mean, I also had. I had a lot of annuals, and I had the Dracula Spine Chiller annual, which had the really good House of Hammer magazine graphic novel adaptation of the Horror of Dracula, and also I think Twins of Evil was another one that's in that particular annual. So I was reading a lot of that stuff, but there was definitely, I don't think I was onto horror novels at that point, but I was definitely absorbing as much horror content as I could.
Yeah. So, I mean, given that growing up you were clearly immersed in horror and in stories, did you know then from an early age that you wanted to be a horror writer? Was that always the dream, always the aspiration?
I don't think it was at that point like the plan, because I don't think I really thought beyond, next day at that point.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed writing stories, and that was what I really loved doing, and I wrote a lot of horror stories at school, and nearly all of them had Dracula and Frankenstein and goodness knows what, to the point where the teachers were concerned enough to bring my parents into school and ask them to check upon my interests. But that, so I think I always loved writing and always felt like that was the thing I did best. So that's, and I think I changed plans as I got a little bit older, going to university, as going to school, I then wanted to be a rock star, and then I wanted to be a comedian, and it all changed. But I think coming back to writing is really the thing that I most feel I'm most natural and happy doing. So yes, I think that's probably the subconsciously maybe I was deciding that that's what I wanted to do without really being able to express it.
Yeah. And in terms of having your parents called into school, I mean, that's kind of the ultimate as someone, writing horrific stuff. It's like, I affected you so much that you had to call my parents in.
Yes. And I think there was one story in particular where I had used my teacher. I think an alien ship comes down, and I think they took her hair so that she was bald, and I think she was absolutely furious about that, and I think that was the final straw.
Yeah. So it wasn't that you cut her up or anything. You just changed her hairstyle, and that was that was it.
Yeah, just some sort of humiliating, yes. So, but there you go. Yes. Yeah. Not proud of it.
I mean, would you often entertain your friends and your classmates with stories? I mean, I'm wondering what the kind of scene was there.
Well, yes, and that was the nice thing, because the teachers encouraged that at my school, and so quite often I would get the chance to read out a story to the class, and that was great, and I think that was such a good thing to be able to do at that age, and I'm very grateful that teachers, our teachers encouraged us and allowed us to do stuff like that. So yeah, that was definitely fun. So it would be, would you like to read your story out to the class? Oh yes, please. So it was good fun doing that.
Yeah. And so I know that a lot of people want to hear about Garth Marenghi, and of course this is the book that you're here to promote as well. So let's jump into that early. Okay. But I mean, it was originally you and Richard Ayoade who created Garth Marenghi. So I mean, what's the origin story there? I'm wondering what conversations the two of you are having to conceive of a spoof pulp 80s horror author.
Well, in all honesty, I'd sort of come up with the character before I met Richard. I actually performed Garth in a Footlights Smoker, which is the Cambridge Footlights is a comedy group at the university, and I was a member of that. And smokers are like cabaret evenings. So I actually did the first run of Garth performances at cabaret evenings there, and also in the Footlights Review, which we did. And I hadn't met Richard at that point, but when we did start writing together, we moved to London and we were looking around to do something. And we were doing a little residency at the Hen and Chickens club in Islington, along with the Mighty Boosh, and Matt Berry was also doing stuff there. And around about that time, and I think it was probably prior to that actually, but Richard and I had wanted to do something horror based, and we were just thinking, well, what should we write that's, you know, horror in theme? I said, well, I actually have, you know, a character that, you know, that I've done on stage. Why don't we pin it on that, pin it around that, and that gives us a way into writing some horror material. So that's how that came about. So Garth became essentially a bit of a host for another thing. And in fact, the first Garth script we wrote together doesn't really feature Garth at all. It's just an intro by Garth, and then a horror story, which is very much a kind of Jack the Ripper, Victorian comedy horror Jack the Ripper story, but we only wrote half that script. But that's actually that's the first script we did that was Garth. So Garth came around as a way of doing something else, and then became the focus of that project.
Right, yeah. And in terms of the TV show Darkplace, how did that come about?
Well, we'd taken Garth Marenghi up to the Edinburgh Festival in 2000 and 2001. And the first year we took it up in 2000, we were very fortunate enough to be nominated for the Perrier Award, which is the comedy award at the Edinburgh Festival. So we were nominated that year. And then the following year, with our follow-up show, we won the award. So that was really fortunate for us, because that meant that we had a lot of interest from TV companies. Because in those days, it was I wouldn't say a guaranteed route, but it was I suppose an accepted route that to get to television, you went to the Edinburgh Festival, and if you did well, you would, you know, that would be your way into television. So we were very fortunate to benefit from that as it was then, because we did get interest from TV, and we did a few things. It didn't go straight to Darkplace. We had we'd both done some TV work prior to going up to Edinburgh even. I was in a show called Bruiser with Robert Webb, David Mitchell, Olivia Colman, Martin Freeman, and Charlotte Hudson. And so we had done bits and bobs. And when we did the Garth show, it wasn't immediately the Darkplace wasn't the first thing we did. That we did a few pilots with the production company Avalon, in which Garth would do a few little pieces, but those were shows that had a lot of other acts in, like Johnny Vegas and Stuart Lee and people like that. So it was only after a while that we put together a pilot. We did a pilot for Darkplace, which was called Garth Marenghi's The Told, which wasn't a sort of set in the 80s. It was a show set now. We basically tried to make it as sort of overly serious as we could. We thought that would be funny, the pomposity of like just these ultra serious dramas, but it actually ended up just being very dull and just not very funny. So we realized we had to kind of go back via Police Squad and make it a little bit sillier. And then we had the idea of, well, why don't we set it as an archive show, something that, you know, they've dug up from an 80s vault. And then that became funny. And as soon as we sort of thought, okay, well, it's this horror writer who's done it like Doctor Who, but he thinks it's really serious, then that became the way to do it, really.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, watching it, as you say, I mean, aesthetically, you can't help but think of those old Doctor Who episodes. But then, I mean, another perhaps less obvious comparison is Lars von Trier's Kingdom.
Yes, which we did actually watch for research. Actually, we watched that, and that was a big key thing for us, of thinking, well, that would be a great sort of show to do, something that's set in a hospital that's, you know, built upon some horrific hellhole. And so that was a big influence, that show. And Richard was a huge Lars von Trier fan, so that sort of came through. And weirdly enough, we didn't realize this at the time, but Stephen King was doing the Kingdom Hospital adaptation of the same show at the same time, but there was no, you know, we had no idea that was the case. We were very fortunate that ours came out just before Kingdom Hospital, so it didn't look like we were doing too much of a copy. But I think that particular show was definitely an influence, but as were lots of other shows of different types. TJ Hooker was a big influence as well.
Right.
This terrible William Shatner cop show.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I mean, I'm wondering, so it's been almost 20 years since the initial release of Darkplace, and you've put out a number of other things, perhaps most notably Possum, very different in tone. So if any Darkplace fans are listening and they're like, oh, well, I'll check out that, it's a very different experience.
It certainly is.
But I mean, what has it been like revisiting and getting back into the mindset of the Garth Marenghi character after a couple of decades?
It's been a bit odd, actually, and it took me a little while to warm up doing it. And there's a lot of initial attempts that were sort of thrown up and tossed away, but now I'm sort of back in the zone a little bit and can kind of think like Garth and write like Garth with relative ease. But it was a little tricky to get started on it again. It is a long time ago since I've done it. In fact, I think the only Garth appearance I did before this was back in 2008. I think that was the last one, at the Bouche Festival. So yeah, it's been a long time. And I'm glad. I'm very glad I kept the glasses.
Yeah,
because they're quite hard to get hold of. So I did have the glasses. So that's the one bit of costume I still had.
Yeah, and you say the glasses. So is there only a singular pair? I mean, even when you were making the TV show, there was no backup. So if the glasses got damaged, was that?
Well, luckily, with the TV budget did allow us to make some more. We either made more, or they got some that were so similar. But I still, because the original pair are actually my granddad's glasses, and I kept them and used them for that. So they are my granddad's original pair of brown tinted shades, which I'm very pleased I still own. But yes, no, we did have a few more made up, because also with TV you have to get all the lenses changed anyway, because they reflect the light from cameras, so you have to get them sort of glazed so that they don't pick up any glare from lighting and technical equipment. Very boring fact there.
Well, maybe people want to know about that, whether they want to or not. It's out there now, so
exactly.
If you're listening. But so if they were your grandfather's glasses, so they actually have sentimental value beyond, the Garth Marenghi show.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And in fact, the little dog in Darkplace, Skipper, who's killed by wasps, that was my parents' dog. So that's a family photo as well. So yes, there's lots of little sentimental bits and bobs, peppered throughout the show.
Yeah. Although, even if the glasses had tragically been damaged, never to be used again, even if mid-scene you'd swap the glasses and just never referenced it, it would kind of be in keeping with the whole kind of tone of the show anyway.
Exactly.
There's so many of these brilliant inconsistencies, and the genius behind it is you kind of have to know how to make a show well to then deliberately make it badly at points, and then to self-reference that. So
that's right. Yeah. Although I have to say that we did make our fair share of mistakes, it being the first TV show we did. So I'm sure that some of our mistakes we probably didn't let on about and just those were intentional. But what we did do was ask all the department heads, how would you do your job badly? What are the ways you could really screw up your job here, and so we got a lot of info on what would be the worst way to do certain things from them, and when we would just pop them in, and if they suddenly came on to take something off the thing or arrange sort out the continuity, we'd say, what's this for? And they say, oh well, his hand was there on the last cut, and then we would basically go, no, okay, forget that, then we'll just keep the bad continuity in. So a lot of those were sort of real mistakes that were happening, but we just put the brakes on correcting them.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in terms of those editing and shot inconsistencies, obviously a favorite for a lot of us is just Dean Lerner and his shotgun just like randomly appearing. But I mean, how did you set about recreating that kind of spirit in Teratome?
Well, it's an odd one because it's a good question, because the way we'd always done Garth's prose when we wrote it for the show and when we did it for the live shows was that the prose was just very immediately bad. So there would be terrible sentences, terrible choice of words. And the problem that I faced was, if you do that for something that's novel length, the joke very rapidly wears thin. And I realized that you needed to have some form of prose style for Garth that was at least competent enough to maintain interest and not let the reader get bored and sort of, otherwise it's just very one note, and you just can't read deliberately bad prose for longer than I think a few paragraphs before, your eyes sort of glaze over and you go, great. So I had to kind of strike a happy medium between a competent piece of writing, but one that still had terrible sentences, terrible ideas every so often. But yeah, so it's less immediately appalling prose wise than say, other Garth material, but hopefully it means that, people will enjoy it for the stories, and perhaps, feeling that, at some level, maybe Garth does have an idea about how to get, from A to B
Right.
without going via, every other letter in the alphabet.
No, I mean, I certainly have been enjoying it a great deal, and I mean, I could tell from the start, okay, I'm in safe hands here, and you've nailed the Garth Marenghi voice once again. I mean, from even the introduction where Garth recalls assaulting a former editor with his company pager, I thought, all right, this is going to be a good time.
Yes, there's an awful lot of violence in Garth's life.
Yeah.
Casual violence.
Yeah.
Which I know is not very PC to say, but I still find hilariously funny. Comic violence can be incredibly funny, and that's why I think I love the young ones and the comic strips so much. But yeah, I know it's something that probably people would shy away from, but I think unnecessarily, unfair violence in a comic setting is often quite funny.
No, I think so too. So, we've both gone on record. So if one of us gets cancelled, we're going down together. So
exactly. Good. Brilliant.
Yeah.
We'll take the rest with us.
Right. But I mean, I didn't ask, in fact, what was the inspiration for reprising the Garth Marenghi role?
Well, that's an interesting one, because it was slight frustration, I think, that things just weren't moving. And the trouble with sort of specializing in film and TV is that most of the time your projects are spent in development. And, I did Possum, and I immediately wrote another script, which I was very pleased with, but it then goes through the development process, and it can take forever, and it's still in development, as are so many other things that I've written. And I think it was real frustration that aside from short stories, which gave me immense pleasure because there's your work, it's there and someone can read it, there was no way of doing that with the films, because it's entirely out of your hands. It's in someone else's control, really. So I think I decided that I just wanted to get on and write something and have a bit of control over it, and sort of get away from the interminable process of development, which is incredibly soul destroying. And I think most writers would agree with me that it's lovely to have something in development, but it's appalling until you can get it out of development and into production. So it can be a very disheartening process, particularly when you've put so much of effort and much of your soul into your piece of writing, for it not to even find an audience. I think, you end up thinking, what's the point? So yeah, that was really, I think, probably the main thing, just wanting to get on. And I knew that prose was about the only place left that you can properly kind of be in charge of it and get it done. So I just decided to sort of pitch that.
Yeah. And I mean, do you have, or did you have any concerns going from Garth Marenghi on the TV to a book? And I mean, what kind of things have you done in terms of trying your best to retain that original audience? Because obviously some people who would watch the show might not want to sit down and read a book, unfortunately.
That's right. And I think it's a balance, because part of me just didn't want it to appeal to the Darkplace audience, because the truth of that is that inevitably some are going to be disappointed because it doesn't have all of the Darkplace characters. It's a different thing. And in a sense, what I didn't want to do was bring out something that's, just trying to harken back to the good old days, if you see what I mean. So
Right.
I knew I wanted to, and had to make it different. At the same time, the fact is that, if you want to sell the book, you have to appeal to those fans that you already have. So it's trying to strike a balance really between giving fans what they want, or readers who'd like viewers who'd like the show, more of the same, but at the same time providing something sufficiently different so that new people who haven't seen it before can get on board. Because I honestly didn't know if there would be anyone that I just didn't know who the audience was anymore, because if they're pretty much my age or below, they might have just moved on and just thought, well, there's other stuff I want to do now. That was very nice 20 years ago, but not now. So it's been very nice to see that there is still interest out there for the book. It was very nicely received when I tweeted about it. So yeah, I'm excited that people will hopefully buy it and enjoy it. But it is, it's not the same as Darkplace. It's similar in many ways, but I was very keen to move on from that and not to just sort of bring out, that equivalent of what we'd done before, really.
I got very excited when I got the email saying there's a new Garth Marenghi book coming. And I don't know if it was ignorance on my part or if you were pretty good to keep it hush hush, but that email just came and it was like, what? New Garth Marenghi is coming? Like I hadn't heard anything about it, and then it's like it is landing November 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah, it's odd. I just, because I hadn't done it for ages, so we just thought of popped it out there to see how it would go down, and it was nice, a very nice response. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think too, putting it out as an audiobook is a smart move, particularly because so many people, they're familiar with that Marenghi voice. So I mean, and I guess too, well, maybe that will bring some people who watch the TV show but don't always read books. It's like you don't even have to. Garth is going to read it for you.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, no, it was good fun recording it as well. So it's very stupid. It was nice to do some other silly voices.
Yeah. And of course, so this book is written by you, Matthew Holness, horror writer, writing as Garth Marenghi, horror writer, writing as Nick Steen, horror writer. So, I mean, as with the original, this is incredibly meta. And I mean, as we said, there are these deliberate cliches and bad writing that you then consciously take apart in front of us. And so in many ways, I mean, it's the horror fiction equivalent of watching a Stuart Lee stand-up set.
I guess so, yeah. But I think, it's. I love reading books about writing, and I think that's also something that I think is not perhaps best understood by a lot of producers and channels, because in film and TV, I think you're always just given notes and nothing's ever right, nothing's ever okay, and it's always got to go through this filter of other people's thoughts on what you've done. But what they don't really, I think, understand is that all writers have read all the writing books, how to write books that they are reading and quoting from. And I think that the what's fun about having read all those books is that actually you can play with the advice. If you know how the things are structured, you can play with structure, and you can. And I think what you're referring to in the book is because they're operating in a world which is the writer's fiction unfolding around them, that means he can comment on the structure of it.
Yeah, yeah.
and when the structure, so that it's nice. It's, and just the form of writing and genre writing in particular is as much fun as the story itself for me. So it's been really good to just sort of play with that stuff, because you don't really get a chance to do it in film and TV. I mean, we were so lucky to do it with Darkplace, but there's no way I think we would ever get that opportunity now. It just doesn't feel like anyone creative is allowed to be creative as well as they can on TV. It's all got to be, of a certain, arrive at a certain, I suppose, level of appeal for the mass audience. So it's very hard to do that, I think, now in TV and film. It's you have to kind of find somewhere else to do it, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think as a result of it perhaps being harder to be creative in TV and film that there will be a backlash, or there will be kind of other companies putting things out? I mean, obviously with so much online, that would seem an avenue to kind of put these things out, but then it's of course establishing the audience and doing the marketing and going about it that way. But I mean, there's clearly an appetite both from writers and consumers and viewers, so it feels like there should be a way to put it out there. It's just finding what that way is.
I think you put that perfectly. I think that's what it is. I hope so. I hope people find find their the things that they like, the ways to write, ways to film and direct in with other medium. It's one really disheartening thing for filmmakers, I think, is that everyone, that's crew, that's actors, they're all moving to TV because that's where the money is. So actually independent film is even harder to get off the ground than it was, and it's entirely dependent upon cast, and really until you've got your cast in place, nothing will happen and nothing can happen. And that means that you've got to find a cast member who's happy to step off their 9 or 10 month lucrative TV contract and do something for not much money. So it's almost impossible. So yes, I hope that creative people, writers, directors, will just find other ways of doing it. And I think a good example of this is, like, for example, the idea of Slender Man. Nothing really tops the Marble Hornets films as a way of kind of creatively presenting that character to an audience. You can put it in a sort of big high budget Hollywood film, but it loses it. They kind of came upon the perfect way to do that, because it came out of just rudimentary technology, short films appealing to the audience that it's aimed at. And so it can be done, and it just feels that people are so stuck in the modern TV way. They were force fed this endless rubbish from nearly all the channels, absorb this box set, and they never end properly and they never end well. And I think it's I think people are just schooled in that crud. I just think there are other things. I think you have to go out and find more interesting stuff for yourself. I mean, I generally just don't watch any TV. I always just dig around and see what I can find elsewhere. It's much more fun, and it means that you're doing it, and you are learning what you like rather than being told what you should like by the people who've got the big shows and the big money. And I sort of think I hate that kind of just absorbing media for the sake of it. And how I grew up doing it was going out and seeking stuff. One book would lead you on to another book. One writer would lead you on to another writer. And I think that's all part of that process. And I think that's lost with, when you're just being dished stuff out and there's nowhere else you can go. It just means creatively we've really lost interesting stuff, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it all sounds rather, pompous. I sound like Garth banging on, but I do feel it. I do feel that. I find it very depressing, the state of TV and film at the moment. It's just endless cliche. I just think no one's aware what the modern cliches are, but they're just thrown at us in every single program, and it's just bland. It's awful. Nothing convinces. Right, you have to stop me. I'm ranting.
Well, I mean, I was going to perhaps agree with some of that and add my own thoughts, but you're asking me to rein it back. So let's take it in a different direction. But you're not wrong with what you've just said. But I mean, in terms of that discovery as a consumer, as a viewer or a reader, I mean, that's certainly how I landed upon Darkplace, nearly 20 years ago. And like, I was seeking out what everyone in that scene was doing. So it's how I found like Snuffbox and the Mighty Boosh and Peep Show and everything in that kind of area. Nathan Barley. Yeah, there were. I'm just going to start listing things that you and your peers have done, which doesn't make for the best conversation, but there's so much, good stuff there.
But there's something so exciting about doing that, I think, and finding stuff and finding, for example, a writer that just really speaks to you, that you haven't been, it's because of your efforts that you've kind of, and that sort of search for it, and that kind of stumbling upon someone who's got a similar outlook to you. I mean, it's a really precious part of that reading experience, I think. And obviously things change, but that was something that I really miss from just browsing books in shops, secondhand books. You can't really do that anymore. And it's so depressing that even in charity shops now, you just know what books are going to be on the shelf, and they're going to be everything that was fairly cheap in the first place from the supermarket aisle, well thumbed and just shoved on the shelf. And it's dreary. It's so dreary.
Yeah.
You're just trying to find interesting stuff, and no one seems to, provide it anymore. It's all what we're told we should be buying.
Right. But in terms of like discovery and in terms of references, as we said, I mean, Teratome is absolutely rife with horror references, as one would expect from you. So I'm wondering, in terms of those, how much of it was planned and how much of it was conceived of in the moment and in the writing?
I think it's an odd one, because I think the first one was the first book, because they're basically, Garth refers to them as tomes. So tome 1, tome 2, and tome 3. And tome 1 typeface is probably the one that it's the one that I probably tried to plan most, but didn't end up being as it doesn't feel planned. It's a really odd one. That I think that was just me learning to write Garth again, and it's in first person, which I thought I thought first person narration was going to be the way that all of these worked, and that's why I was sort of convinced that was the way to do it. But by the time I'd done that first one, I thought it could get a little dull just hearing Garth's voice doing this all the time, So I decided to do something that was, with an omniscient narrator. So Bride of Bone was one that I sort of plotted it. I always plot the stories in advance, but that one I had most fun writing, because it was like a relief from having done the first one. Knew that I could kind of get that number of words done and out, and I think I just really enjoyed writing the third one. And then I think I probably got a bit of slight writer's block with the third one, panic of, oh gosh, can I do another one? I don't know. So I don't know. It's an odd one. In terms of structure, I mean, it's an odd structure. They're all about 25, 30,000 words. I mean, my big fear was being able, can I write a book that's novel length? And for years I tried and failed, because I would just, get worried and anxious and just duck out and think, oh, I can't do this. And I was always obsessed with these sort of 35,000 word books, or novelettes or novellas, short novels. It always varies what they're called depending on what genre. But for many years I would visit my partner's relatives in Australia, and I would go out there, and they would still publish every month 8 Cleveland westerns, they were called, the Cleveland Publishing Company, and they were just 8 very short westerns that you just picked off the magazine rack, and I just read them and absorbed them, and just and I always thought I love that format of like the short novel like that. It's almost like they work like a film. A film kind of works really well. If you try and adapt a long novel for a film, it doesn't quite work. It kind of suits a TV series, because you can have all that, extra stuff. But often when films are condensed, when books are condensed for film, it ends up with something that isn't quite the same thing, and it has to change because the format doesn't stick. But oddly, these little 35,000, 40,000 word booklets, they do read and feel very much like you're watching a rather fast-paced film. So I kind of really liked that form. So I just decided that I would do 3 of those, add them together, and see that as like sections from a longer work that Garth's been writing. So structurally, that's and the best example for that in terms of the horror genre were actually the old pulp magazine stories. They were often between 20,000 and 30,000 words. So I think probably rather than looking at 80s paperback horrors as inspiration, I was probably reading much more Hugh B. Cave and writers like that, the old Shudder fiction horror stories that were in magazines, pulp magazines like Terror Tales and Uncanny Tales and Weird Tales, all of those magazines.
Yeah, and even though they're 3 distinct tomes, I mean, the good thing is, or at least a good thing for me, is that you're referencing them. Obviously, you're referencing the first one in the second, so you're not referencing the stories before they happen. But it does feel like okay, this is all kind of part of the same universe, so it doesn't feel so disconnected.
That's right. And also to sort of help that, I was very keen to get a map in the book. So there is a map of Stalkford, and brilliantly drawn by Alistair Wood. And that is, that's, for me, that's always part of me. I'm a huge fan of books that have maps. I love Michael Moorcock's Elric, the novels, and I love the obviously the Tolkien maps and also horror maps. There are books in horror books that have maps in the front that I love. Some of the James Herbert books, I think Ghost of Sleep has a map, and some John Saul books have maps, I think. And I just, it's lovely. And of course the fighting fantasy books that I grew up on all have maps. So in an odd way, they're that's my way into the world of the book in many ways. I think you provide a map, and then people who want to get into the world, they start filling in the gaps, and it all feels more like a proper thing.
Yeah And I was happy to see the Dark Third, homage to King's The Dark Half. So I mean, it's a criminally underrated King novel and Romero film, so it's good to see it get a little bit of love.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites. And I think at that time, I remember it coming out, and it was odd because it really was that transition stage between the sort of the 80s King and the 90s more mystery thriller sort of King coming in. And it was a really good, it's like the perfect bridge between those two genres, I think. Literally in the book, it's, you've got a thriller writer in the book, but it's a horror novel. So it is like the perfect transitional book between one genre and another.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, you're a big fan of writing about writers, because you've also got you've got your crime pulp 17-minute short film. Goodness, what?
Yes,
a gun for
George.
A gun for George. I started blanking on the name, but I mean, a gun for George. For anyone who hasn't seen it, just watch it. It's 17 minutes. It's available. If you like Garth Marenghi and you like pulpy crime, then you're gonna have a good time.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, that's the project, and oddly enough, one of the projects I'm most proud of, I think, because just such a lot went into it. And again, that was a time when I was just absorbing those westerns and so I thought, well, they're very similar to the there were writers like Terry Harknett, who did who wrote as George Gilman, if I think I'm right, remembering this right, basically Edge Western. So it was New English Library, and they did a lot of these, and they're all similar length, and they were just, I think he wrote about 40 of these things. Edge and Steel, that was the other one, Steel. So I was sort of dreaming up a writer that basically wrote those sorts of things. And I think it was all because that's what I really wanted to do myself, but I just didn't feel I had the ability to churn them out. I mean, I did try and write some Terry Finch novelettes or novellas for a long time, and I got quite a way through them, but I think I had a bit of a mental block about getting over getting it finished. So I have lots of them that I've started, and maybe now that I've done Teratome, I'll have enough confidence in being able to finish them that I can get those written finally.
Oh, yeah, it'd be good to see some Terry Finch novels out there in the world. I mean, there's so many. It's incredible, really, how much you pack into 17 minutes. There are so many good lines, which I'm obviously not going to reference because then I'm going to spoil the bloody thing for people I've just told to watch it. But it is very good. But, you know, the problem with talking about a short film is you can't really say anything. You're going to spoil it if you say too much about it. So.
No, all I was going to say was that I think that was the plan about going into it, you know, because there are so many short films. It was the first thing I directed and the first sort of short film that I'd written. And in doing research for it, there are just so many short films that just settled for, you know, budget-wise, just settled, I guess, for two people in a room talking. And I just always found that tedious and very nobly done. Don't get me wrong, you know, budgets, you know, don't allow you to do much on a short film. But then I would see some films that had just tried to turn them into like little mini feature films. And there's a really good Mike Leigh one. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's about hairdressers. It's absolutely brilliant. I thought, well, that is a Mike Leigh film condensed into, you know, 20 minutes or however long it is. So I thought I'll try and do that. I'll try and turn a big film into a small film.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's worked remarkably. It's just a shame that there's not more people who are aware of it, but you know, man, that's the case with so much good art. You know, good art does not necessarily mean a wide audience. And
no, that's it. You have to go out and find these things, I think.
yeah. But I mean, in Teratome, there is obviously a lot of conflict between Nick Steen and his editor Roz. I'm wondering, how much back and forth did you have with your own editor for Teratome?
A lot, actually. Mafanwi Moore, who commissioned it, she's absolutely brilliant, and I can say hand on heart that Garth's experience with editors is not in no way, shape, or form my experience with editors. Editors are so vital to the writing process. I mean, there were lots of times I think writing it where I just got hit by a block thinking I don't know if I can do this, and Mafanwi was just brilliant, able to give me great ideas, helped sort out jokes. I mean, and she was great because her background's in TV comedy, so she had a very good I guess writer's brain on it anyway. But no, she was absolutely fantastic and really helped me get them done, because I found the prospect of writing a book so daunting, and I couldn't have done it without an editor like Mafanwi helping me throughout the whole thing. So there was a lot of to and fro, but again, would crucially, unlike TV and film, would let you get on with it and would respect what you wanted to do and find ways to realize that. Whereas I think the problem these days is that no one's really interested in what the writer wants to do. It's do what we want, change it so that we can do this for our buyers and our it's a totally different sort of way of I think engaging with a writer.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, with screenwriting as well, I mean, there can be instances where you sell a script and then they kind of bring their own writers in and pretty much rewrite the entire thing. So it can be. Yeah,
I mean that has happened to me, and I think it happens to an awful lot of writers, and it's not a great feeling, I have to say.
No, I mean, that is not a shocker. I was not expecting you to say, "Well, I feel pretty bloody good when that happens." Yeah, no way.
Yeah.
But what do you think it is about horror and comedy that go so well together, particularly when it comes to television?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's you're in both of them. You're saying what people are thinking but aren't expressing necessarily. So you're saying the unsayable. So I think there's a similarity there. In horror, you're sort of dealing with things that people wouldn't normally want to deal with. And I think probably comedy has a similar thing. You're doing and saying things and depicting things that shock people because it's, it's taking them very abruptly outside their comfort zone. So I think there's a similarity there. And I think both probably also rely on a sense of timing, because timing a comic moment is vital. You have to time it well. And similarly with horror, you have to time that well. And whether that's timing a jump shock moment, or timing a slow build up of atmosphere, they're both, you're very conscious of having to create an effect. And so there's an objective part of your brain that both those genres share and employ, that perhaps you don't if you're just writing a conventional novel about, two people who work in a place and whatever. You're after a specific effect, whether it's, if you're in comedy, you're after the laugh. And if you're in horror, you're after, either that feeling of fear or the shock or whatever, but you're after something. And I think they probably both are similar in that sense.
Yeah. And I guess too, I mean, when you're directing as well as writing, that affords you a lot more freedom. And I know that you've said before that you think writers get far more respect when they're the writer and director.
Yeah, very much so. But less so now.
Right.
I think that was the case maybe 5-10 years ago, but outside film, I don't think that applies. I think in television, the writer is not important, and the director is no longer important. It's who owns the IP and which is the intellectual property, and the channel is all powerful. So the channels will sweep up all rights. You don't have anything going in. You just have the chance to write something, but that's all you have. You've already given everything else over. So it isn't like that anymore. And it was why I chose to direct in the end, to basically just secure as much of that. So maybe it was going that way. But now I would say it's a pretty dismal outlook for any writer or director, unless you just want to, direct and just take the paycheck and go home. But, if you have to, pitch for the tone. This is an odd thing. This is a phrase I came across recently, a tone pitch, where you have to pitch the way you want to direct something to a channel, which I just find totally bizarre. I mean, I can understand it, a series and perhaps a channel want a uniform look, but there you go. They want a uniform look. So can you really do anything interesting or imaginative in that context? And I don't think you can really, unless you have to really struggle to bring your own voice to it, I think. So yeah, it's for someone who for a kind of writer and director who really just want to express, their view of something, a view of a story, or it's becoming increasingly hard to do that, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about this, and it makes me think that, we could see things really branching off. So you've got people creating, creative art, and then you've got people creating independent art. Because if you think of all the great filmmakers, I mean, they didn't get there from following a formula. They had their own vision, their own way of doing things, their own uniqueness. And I mean, if these kind of artistic restrictions are happening, particularly with television, then we're probably going to see more and more of the great, filmmakers and artists and writers just gravitate towards film rather than TV.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there's a choice you make. You either decide that you're going to surrender your voice and get gainful employment, with shooting someone else's show the way they want it shot, or you just sort of go, well, no, actually, I'll go elsewhere and see what I can come up with. But it's it's a much more difficult path, but at least you're in charge of what you're doing, which you're just not otherwise.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to the time that we've got together today, but I mean, we got to talk at least a little bit about Possum, which, as I said before,
go for
is
it. Yes,
tonally. I mean, it's as different really as you can get from Garth Marenghi. I mean, Garth Marenghi is about as light and comedic as horror can go, whereas Possum is as bleak and as dark as horror can go. I mean, did you deliberately set out to make the darkest horror film possible, perhaps to show people that there is more to Matthew Holness than Garth Marenghi?
Not to show them that it was more of me, I think, but I did set out to do something. I suppose I did want to make a kind of truthful film we'd had so much in recent years with the Savile revelations and things like that, and it was it had kind of come about as a story I'd written anyway, so it was that was. It was one of these situations where, again, was struggling to try and find, a way to get a film made, because I was trying to get the Reprisalizer made, which was a full length feature version of Gun for George.
Yeah.
And the problem was I just hadn't nailed it in the script. I couldn't find the best way of doing it. And the trouble is, film development takes a long time, and years were going by, and then I was thinking, well, if I don't do something, what can I do? I knew I didn't want to do comedy at that point. I absolutely had enough of it and just didn't want to do anything. And I thought, well, maybe it's an easier jump from doing comedy horror to serious horror, because there's one connecting strand there, rather than going from comedy horror to serious crime film making. So I sort of set the Reprisalizer aside for a while and thought, well, maybe it's a less of a leap to go to serious horror. So that's when I had that story that I had kicking around. I thought, well, why don't I try and adapt that for a film? So it wasn't any major mission to that wasn't the burning story that I wanted to sort of make a film out of. That wasn't it. But once I'd made the decision to adapt to the story and try and turn it into a film, then I thought, okay, well, what do I really like about horror films? What are my favorite horror films? They're the silent horror films. They're the films that are about something, but they don't really state what they're about, And I think that became, what I wanted to do, not make something that's a conventional kind of slasher film or anything like that. I just wanted to make an old silent horror film.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of went into it, really. And then, slowly as it came together in the script, it just became this very, very dark subject matter. But I thought that's probably the only way you could deal with that subject matter in a film, actually, is to kind of go for something silent and expressive, rather than literally kind of telling people what it's about. Because it's a subject matter that you would instantly not want to watch a film about if you were given the choice. So
yeah, and Sean Harris's acting is just remarkable, and the use of lighting, mirrors, the camera work, it's so good at evoking this thoroughly uncomfortable and tense film. I mean, so much so that, particularly with it being, kind of almost a silent film, it seems it would have been difficult to write this and not direct it, because of how much of its success must rely on the direction.
Yes, and actually, it was a struggle to convince people, and I know that there are probably quite a few people who it's not a fun film for them to sit and watch, and they probably find it quite dull and lengthy, and not really getting to the point. And I think that was the point of doing it, because wanted to try to truthfully reflect that sense of isolation that someone like Philip, the character in the film, is experiencing for years and years and years, with no one listening to him and unable to express himself. But the first version of the script was only about, I think, 50 pages, which is not long enough for a feature film. But I took solace from the fact that I picked up the scripts to Nosferatu and various other silent horrors, and those scripts were 45, 50 pages. So I thought, well, okay, if this is a silent film, that feels you can get that is feature length for a silent film. Mm-hmm. So, but it took some convincing, it's as all films do. And luckily I had very good producers in James Harris and Mark Lane, T-Shot Film Company, who were completely behind my vision for it and how I wanted to do it. And that's really important, to have producers that are on your side and that, are going to fight your battles, because there are always going to be battles with the people who are actually, providing money for you to make this thing. And you have an obligation and a duty to make it, as commercial as you can. But at the same time, it shouldn't mean that you can't try and make an more artistic kind of film that isn't a conventional sort of horror thriller. But in order to sort of navigate that rather, treacherous water of the, the funders, saying, well, hang on a minute, people don't really want to see something like this. It's just crucial to have very good producers that will come in and help you, negotiate with them how best to realize your vision in that sense. So yeah, I'm very pleased we got it done, because it was a difficult film to make, and it was a difficult film to really get off the ground, I think. Although once it got going, it was fine. As soon as we got Sean on board, then the thing started to gain momentum. But yeah, it's hard, because it is in a similar harking back to what we were talking about, of needing to find places perhaps where you can be more creative. Possum is, I suppose, a good example of, it's kind of on the it's got half it's halfway there. It's there's you can see why that is a film that probably you couldn't throw too much money at, because then the financiers would probably think, yeah, we're never going to get money back on this. So you've got to, you have to respect that at the same time. And I guess the way to stay creative, as a writer director, is you probably do have to go low budget. I think that's the only really way you can ensure to have that level of control over it, but at the same time, freedom. So you can't expect people to pay you for that, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Although I feel if this was a high budget film, it would almost lose some of, what it is. And I mean, there's such a murkiness to it. And the house as well that Philip and Morris occupy is perfect too. I mean, how did you find that location?
Well, the interior of the house is a set. In fact, Charlotte Pearson, our production designer, designed that. The exterior of the house is somewhere that we found. We didn't find that actually until we were about 2 weeks into filming, and we were absolutely, getting very concerned that we didn't have our exterior house, because in the script it was a house in the woods, in an area of woodland, very, on the outskirts of the city, but somewhere that was a bit more of a rural location. And it was only when we realized, that we couldn't really find the right kind of house I was thinking of in the country. They're either all farm buildings or very old buildings. And I suddenly realized, well, of course, because I'm thinking of an American thing. Those sorts of houses, modern houses in rural settings, are kind of an American thing. They don't really exist in the UK. So it was then that I read, okay, well, then it needs to be a house that most people have grown up walking past, and it is always the rundown house. I mean, there's weirdly enough, there's one in Whitstable that's only just sold, but it's been boarded up since I was a kid, and I was looking on the estate agent's website, and I think it hasn't been changed since like 1961 or something like that, and it's just been locked up and blocked up for decades. So those places really do exist, and I think that then became the kind of house. And lo and behold, there was one in Norwich that was like that, just a very old house that had boarded up windows. It hadn't been lived in for a while. And yeah, we were just very lucky to find it. But it is a case of, the interior is a studio, and the house is, the exterior is the house.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did a hell of a job, with the interior. They really did. And, it also evokes for me the atmosphere of, I don't know if you've played the video game Silent Hill for The Room.
Oh, yeah.
But
I'm a huge Silent Hill fan, and Silent Hill 2 and 4 are my favorites. And that was definitely in my head while making them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a huge Silent Hill fan, perhaps such as myself, you were very excited this week when they had a plethora of Silent Hill announcements. They're remaking Silent Hill 2 finally. They've got
Yeah.
a brand new Silent Hill game coming out that will be set in Japan. So that's intriguing because, they're all set in America. And then there's going to be a new Silent Hill film. So, and there's other games as well. But yeah,
I'm hugely excited because, but I'm also disappointed because what I really wanted, and I know why they can't do this, but what I really wanted was just to be able to play the original on a modern systems, just so that it's preserved and that I can always play that game, because it looks to me like the original is still only going to be existing on old PS2s, and I had to go and stupidly ended up giving away my when I moved on to when the PS2 left, I just assumed that Silent Hill 2 and all of those would be available at some point or another. So I gave away all my old copies, and of course they're now so expensive to get hold of. And last year I managed to finally get them all back, and I was playing through them again. But my God, I just want the original game preserved.
Yeah.
That's all I want. I'm not really that interested in the remake of it. I don't need to see the graphics improved. Part of the beauty of it is that the graphics are what they are. It's the atmosphere, and it's the artistry and the script that is what's beautiful about that game. And I hope that they don't wreck that. I hope they don't start telling you the subtext and sort of telling you what it's about, because it's so subtly done in the game. It's a true work of art, and I hope they don't just overdo it. But it's nice that at least Silent Hill is continuing. Absolutely. I will of course buy and play all the games if I can get a PS5, which I still can't get.
That is the major obstacle. That is the issue.
You go, well, they say, you'll be ready later in the year. You go, yeah, but I'm not going to have a PS5 by then.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and also they did do Blair Witch, which I thought was an excellent game. I really liked that. So I'm the jury's out. I'm optimistic, but I do wish they would at least just make the original available in a more secure form than it is.
Yeah, I know. I feel you on that, and I too. I sold many of my original games, the original Resident Evils, the original Silent Hills, naively assuming, well, of course they'll be available. Well, no, no is the answer.
It's very sad
to that one. But I must say though that I'm happy, and I feel pretty good about the fact that with this remake, they're gonna have the original composer Akira Yamaoka, because I think those soundtracks really, they added so much. They made the games; it wouldn't be the same without them. So I think
the greatest horror soundtracks of modern times. I really do. I think they are absolutely wonderful. I have them on CD and vinyl. I think they're absolutely superb. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. They are, and I will. I often, if I'm writing, I'll have writing horror stories. They're the number one thing to have on in the background. So atmospheric.
Me too.
Yeah.
God, we've got a couple of absolute Silent Hill nerds on the podcast now.
Have you got the book, by the way? It's called the Terror Engine, Silent Hill, the Terror Engine. It's a book of game criticism, interestingly enough, and it just is. It's an academic text on the Silent Hill series, and it's well worth getting. It's a really good read.
I haven't got it, but I'm now immediately gonna have to, find it out. The good thing about living in Japan is even really obscure things are normally available. Like I might, if I, have a look in some of the video game shops, even be able to find like an original copy of Silent Hill and an original PS1 to play it on. So,
well, I remember when I was trying to get the soundtrack CDs, there were still some copies of, they did a big box set of all of the soundtracks in one. I think there are a couple of those still available in Japan from sellers, so it's worth checking out. The Silent Hill book is called Silent Hill: The Terror Engine, and it's by Bernard Perron. and it's brilliant. I love it. It's just a book of criticism on a game. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. I can see it. It's available. It's in Japan. It will be. I can get that delivered to me in 2 days' time. There you go. Yeah. Absolute success. Yeah, that is happening. Well, I did have a couple of questions from one of our patrons.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Dan Howarth says, how has your approach to writing evolved over the years from something as hilarious as Darkplace to something as weird and bleak as Possum, and have your influences changed?
I would say no. I don't think my influences have changed. I think I was less interested in writing comedy scripts, definitely. I just didn't want to do that. And when I set out to write anything, the last thing I'm thinking of is I want to write something funny. So that's kind of gone as a reason for doing, which sounds odd given that I've just written Teratome,
Right.
But I actually, I wasn't. It's odd. I think I was more interested in the idea of what had Garth written. What kind of stuff is he writing now? What would actually a Garth book be like? I think that was interesting me more than wanting to write a book that would make people laugh. So I think it's that. I'm always interested in writers and how they go about their job and what they do and what drives them to write the stories, and particularly pulp writers. I mean, I love serious horror writers. Obviously, I'm a huge Sheridan Le Fanu fan, but there's something about the throwaway pulp writing and for the writers that do it over and over that I find deeply fascinating and a really honourable way of kind of earning a living in an odd way, because it's sheer hard work and persistence. And so I suppose that's what's always interested me in terms of approaching my own projects. They're always, I suppose, in some way a look at that creative process and why people do it. And I think I've always written serious sort of short stories. I mean, I've written 2 or 3 before I wrote the Possum short story, which, are kind of throwaway. They were just sort of ways of learning to do it, really. And I think Possum was probably the first short story I wrote that I was pleased with and thought, well, I wouldn't mind, I'd happily put my name to that one. So I've always done that, and that was around about the time of still doing comedy on TV. So I don't think it's changed that much, actually. I think I just know what I prefer writing about now, and I'm less concerned about, wanting to, I suppose, do a comedy show. That isn't really what drives me anymore. But what is Garth writing? That does interest me, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think we may have then covered a little bit of the second question, but I'll ask it anyway. So he says, secondly, at a screening of Possum in Liverpool, so this is highly specific, you hinted that comedy is on the back burner for you now. With you returning to Garth Marenghi on the page, is this still the case? If so, what prompted the change of heart?
I think at the moment I'm just happy to do the books because I just enjoy writing. So I don't think, comedy's not on the books. I would certainly never be going back and doing, you won't see me on a panel show. You won't be doing anything like that. They wouldn't want me for a start. I very much doubt. But no, that's not what I would aspire to be doing. I think I'll do, see what the reaction is to the book, see if people like the stories and not just the idea that Garth is back. If it has a life beyond that, then I'd be very happily writing more of those for a while. But as for making another Garth thing, possibly, I don't know. It would have to be something that, in light of what we've been discussing today, I'd have to know that I could do it exactly how I want to do it. If they were going to say, well, we like Garth Marenghi, but we'd love him to do, we want him to be in this. And then, you start getting other people's ideas of what it is. Well, no, I'm not really interested in that. So no, I'd have to be Garth-like and say my way or the highway, that sort of thing.
Right. You putting on that accent reminds me of possibly the worst attempt at a remake ever, which is the American attempt at a Peep Show remake. I think they did have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
I think they did I think it's only one pilot episode, and it just took everything that was good about Peep Show and removed it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. This is what happens, unfortunately. It's. I hope they got paid well.
I mean, I don't think it really got far enough for anyone to get any money off that, but
it is so difficult, though. It is so difficult, and like I was saying, you just have so little control over it these days. And I think, you can never have total control over it. No one ever gets that until you're, established enough to be able to demand something like Final Cut. It's always going to be difficult, and it's always a balance you have to strike.
Yeah.
But it is difficult, and it's getting harder. So to get something on screen the way you want it is a very rare thing, and I don't think it often happens. We were very, very, very lucky to be able to do that with Darkplace, and we still didn't have total carte blanche. I mean, we had to negotiate for what we wanted, and oddly enough, we had to negotiate not to have swear words in it because Channel 4 actually wanted swear words in it, and we didn't. So that was a really bizarre discussion that we ended up having, and we had to put our foot down. We will not have swearing, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that was a bit odd, but we wouldn't get, I don't think we'd get that opportunity again. It's we were very fortunate. So yeah, I you have to be very grateful for having had that chance to do it, and to do it the way we wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I think, your answer in terms of whether there would be another Darkplace on the screen is the best possible answer someone could hope for. It's only if all the right conditions are there, only if you don't compromise any of your artistic integrity in terms of doing it. You need that creative control.
I think absolutely. And I know he's a bit of a controversial figure, but I do really like Harlan Ellison's attitude to it, and obviously this is a much tweeted video of him where which is called "Pay the Writer," and he gets very, very angry about it. But I think I've become old and slightly cranky, and I just do think that's a code to live by as a writer. You have to look after yourself because no one else is going to look after you, and I think you have to be principled, and if it's not right, don't do it. That would be my advice to writers. If you're happy to go into the business, just stick up for yourself and have the courage, I think, to just walk away if it's not right. I think
yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a tremendous amount of fun chatting with you. I'd certainly like to do it. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd love to do it again sometime. There's still so much more that I'd like to dig into. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Would love to.
All right. Well, where can our listeners connect with you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. Who knows how many people are going to be left on Twitter once it's bought out. But I don't know, but I have a Twitter. It's at Mr. Holness on Twitter, and that's it. I'm not on Instagram, not in any of that stuff, and you'll probably find me in a bookshop somewhere at the back.
yeah,
trying to find some obscure horror titles. Westerns.
Or just reading some video game horror criticism.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
Gosh, no, I don't think so. I hope everyone, is. Thank you for listening, I should say. Yes, thank you for listening. Thank you for having me on, and I hope you like Teratome.
Well, that was just a great conversation, and thank you so much for listening to This Is Horror with Matthew Holness. I do hope that we get him back on the show, and hopefully next time Bob will be able to join me. So we put that one together a little bit last minute, and for whatever reason Bob wasn't up for getting up at 4 a.m. So it is what it is. But Next episode, we are going to be chatting with Paul Tremblay. And if you want to get that ahead of the crowd, if you want to get every episode ahead of the crowd, become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you can submit questions to the interviewee. We've got the likes of Brian Asman and Jonathan Jans on the show very shortly indeed. You also get to become a member of the Writers Forum on Discord and get a slew of bonus podcasts, including Story Unboxed, the horror podcast on the craft of writing, and the Q&A sessions with myself and Bob Pastorella. Alright, before I wrap up, a little bit of an advert break.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabinio Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com. Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. Exploring all the shadows of horror, our guests include writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, composers, and more. We've been going to cons for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Beyond guests, contests, movies, panels, and podcasters, our layout and programming are designed to further incorporate the very idea of community. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. HorrorOnMain.com.
Cosmovorous, the debut cosmic horror novel from R.C. Housen. Esmeralda has lived on the fringes of society for as long as she can remember, until a Halloween night gone wrong unlocks a cache of nightmarish memories. Visions of a bizarre desert town, images of a mysterious woman, the pain of an ultimate betrayal, and the shame of a bargain made in blood. Now she must travel back and learn the true nature of the ravenous cosmos. Cosmovorous, available everywhere books are sold.
Well, that about does it for another episode of This Is Horror podcast. And I really do implore you to go out and buy Garth Marenghi's Teratome. It is a fantastic book, and it really does live up to the Darkplace show whilst being something fresh and original. And if you have never watched Darkplace, then certainly do. You are going to be in for a real treat there and a lot of laughs. I think it definitely stands up today. So with that said, I will see you in the next episode with Paul Tremblay. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.